So due to the change in format of this Board of Directors meeting, please be aware that during the course of this meeting, the microphones of the viewing audience will be muted except during the identified public comments at this meeting. For today's agenda, this is item number 2. There is a chat box feature in Zoom, but we will not be utilizing this feature for the meeting. If you have questions or comments, we respectfully ask that you contact the central office or email the superintendent, which is me, or any of the board members, and an answer will be provided to you as soon as possible. Again, we thank the public for their patience during these highly unusual circumstances. So attendance and all votes will be done through a roll call. So again, board members, whether you're in person or online, please, when I call your name, please cast your vote with the 3 available options of yes, approve, no, disapprove, or abstain. So we are going to start, before we get too far into the meeting, by doing a very quick roll call. So please bear with me for just a moment. We'll make sure everyone is here. So Kim.
Present.
Wendy.
Present.
Dane. Not hearing him at this time, so we'll check again. Kathy.
Here.
Melissa.
Present.
Alex.
Present.
Patty.
Here.
Rebecca.
Here.
Betty.
Here.
Sean.
You just ran to a car.
Oh, I see him coming in. We'll get him in just a second. Gary.
Here.
And David.
Here.
All right. And Sean Roderick is coming in now, so he is here, just so people know. So with that, I will turn it over to number 2, which is public comment. I don't know if we've got anyone signed up on the clipboard. So nobody signed up on the clipboard. Is there anyone at home? We want to double check that before we move on. In our home viewing audience. And we are not hearing or seeing anyone requesting to speak. So we'll go on to number 3, if that's okay.
Additions and adjustments to the board, by the board, to the minutes for the day schedule. See none.
So I do have one. So number 5D, we are going to cross off the agenda. So number 5D, we will be crossing off the agenda.
Go ahead.
I would like to talk about school sports.
Yeah. And I'll be doing that, Mr. Roderick, at 6A, and I'll just kind of go right into sports as part of that update, if that works for you, unless you'd like a separate item.
Have to vote at some point, 'cause I know that
Yeah.
this part is just-
Right.
kids are gonna be allowed to-
Yep.
I didn't know that it's a requirement.
Yeah.
I would like to
Yeah.
take that up sooner rather than
Yeah.
later.
The communication I got from the MSSA was that boards would not have to vote, but if they'd like to do so, they certainly can do that. So I do have an update that Brant gave me that kind of follows what I've been saying all along, that we would be following what the MPA suggested. So, but certainly if that's something, yeah, okay. Yeah. Okay, all right. So I have no problem with that whatsoever. Yeah. No. Yeah.
Surprise, actually, was that
Yeah.
actually made a call before
Yeah.
junior.
Yeah.
I was told they did.
Yeah. So,
That's why
yeah,
I'm surprised us.
yeah,
So
yeah,
we'll take a vote.
yep,
I mean, we don't
Yeah.
have to, I'm not.
yeah. Yeah.
Okay, workshop.
So the workshop for today, guys, we usually do a training actually before the school year starts. So this year I contacted MSMA, and MSBA and MSSA, and talked with Eileen King. She was here last year, did our training with us last year, and was willing to do a training again this year moving forward. So So she is with us, but she's with us virtually. So you're going to hear her voice kind of echoing through the cafeteria as we go forward here. And I just will kind of throw this out to everyone so they know. Internet has been a little spotty across the state today. I know several people had issues, and I know Eileen's on a hot spot right now, so we're going to try to make do the best we can moving forward. So having said all of that, I'm going to turn it over to you, Eileen.
Good evening, everyone. I'm sorry I could not be with you tonight. However, I'm looking forward to working with you. I will leave it up to Jay to scan the crowd for questions. I tend to talk fast, so please give him the signal that I need to slow down. Diane will be coordinating the slides, just because I'm not sure I could have been able to share the slides given my internet issues down here in Booth Bay Harbor. I always love coming to RSU 38. My first teaching job in the state of Maine was at Maranacook. When it was a $7 school, I taught Spanish. I came in 1988, and it was probably one of my favorite teaching jobs was at the Maranacook Community Schools. I also was the assistant cross-country ski coach under Steve DeAngelis, and together he and I started the middle school cross-country ski program. So I always feel like I'm coming home to Maranacook, and I've been in that gym many, many times. So. Diane, do you want to go to the first slide, please? Or the slide that we talked about? And keep going. So the purpose of tonight is to review school boards in Maine. What we try to do for Maine School Management, and let me fill in a little bit more. Maine School Management is really the home of the Maine School Board Association and the Maine School Superintendent Association. I am the executive director of the Maine School Superintendent Association. I served as superintendent of schools in the Booth Bay region for 16 years, and prior to that as a elementary and principal, and prior to that a middle school principal, and prior to that I was at Maranacook. And so what Maine School Management does is we really want to provide trainings for school boards to make sure you stay in your lane, to make sure you understand the do's and don'ts, to make sure that you know what your roles and responsibilities are, and to hopefully create a strong board that knows what the effective procedures and protocols are. It's unfortunately how quickly school boards can get into trouble when they aren't aware of the do's and the don'ts, and probably most oftentimes the most innocent way will reach out and do something or say something, and then you're dealing with a significant issue. So tonight I'm going to go over the basic rules for school boards. I know for many of you this is a review, and I will certainly pause for any questions. Next slide, please. I want you to feel free to ask questions, and if there are a couple things you want to find out, jot them down on the side of your paper, and make sure we'll leave some time for Q&A. Next. So the most important thing I like to start out with is all school board members. You campaign as individuals. However, when you become a board member, you serve as a member of a team. And I'm going to say this, there is no I in team. You serve as a member of the team. You have no authority as individuals. So you have no authority outside of the boardroom. You have no authority in Hannaford. You have no authority at a soccer game. You have no authority at an open house or a Christmas concert. The only time you are a school board member, and the only time you have authority is when you are acting with the entire board. And that's very, very hard concept for many people, both new board members and the public, to understand, because your public says, oh, I see you're a school board member. I'm going to stop and ask you questions. Just keep in mind, you have no authority to act as a board member unless that authority has been given to you by a board vote. And we'll talk about this several times. The other thing I want to point out is the success of a board member is tied to the success of the board. So your board will work collaboratively. They'll work on issues. They'll make decisions in the best interest of the students. And we want to make sure that each board member is well prepared that they've reviewed the materials, and that the board can function as a collaborative team to make the best decisions in the interest of the students of your communities. Next, please, Diane. So one of the things I want to talk about is school committees in Maine. They're governing bodies for the school administrative districts. You get your statutory powers and duties for a school administrative district. And there are handouts. I'm not sure how they've been organized, but handout number 1, that's not in your slide packet. I'll just summarize them, but basically the powers and duties of school boards are normally set forth in state statutes and sometimes in municipal charters. Basically, you're the legislative policy-making group. You're responsible for the development and adoption of policy. And I'm going to talk a lot about policy tonight. You're responsible for acquiring reliable information through your superintendent, through board presentations about and making decisions about educational programs. This is not for you to go on your own kind of hunt. All the information that you need to discuss and all the information that you will share to help you make a decision must be done in public meeting, must be done as part of your school board meeting, and must be done in public. So you oversee the scope and nature of educational program. The superintendent shall employ based on the final approval of the board. So the superintendent will nominate personnel for employment, and you will hire that person or not. That depends on what that information is. But the superintendent shall nominate and the board shall vote on hiring. And then the third part of that is the superintendent will provide the contract. You will serve as quasi-judicial. We'll get into this and act as a court of appeals based in certain situations where you'll have to act as judge and jury. We'll talk about that in a couple slides. You're responsible for presenting a budget to the public that is developed by your superintendent and his business office. That I'm sure you'll spend a lot of time talking about budget and what's in the budget and the impact on taxpayers. But you're absolutely ultimately responsible for adopting a budget to bring to the taxpayers. You'll determine what the school's facilities needs are based on the information that's brought to you by your facilities director and your superintendent. Communication with public. The board is responsible for providing adequate and direct means for keeping the citizens informed about the schools, and there needs to be a process. That doesn't mean that all of you can individually go out and share communication about the school. As an individual board, you don't have that authority. There will be a process in which is decided by the board and or the superintendent and board chair, which I'm sure you already have in place, is how you communicate with the public. And that's important that you do have that process in place and that you do know who is responsible for issuing those communications. Next slide, please. So once again, effective boards understand there is no authority except when acting as part of the majority of the board and when you're in the board meeting. Outside of the board meeting, you are not a board member. You have no authority outside of the board member, except when the board, by a vote, delegates authority to a board member. And probably the best example I can give of this is when you're entering into maybe contract negotiations. You're going to have two or three board members represent the board, and those two board members that will be on the negotiating team that represents the board will have that authority as determined by the vote to nominate those two board members to be on the negotiating team. So that's when you will have authority outside of the boardroom, is when it is voted upon and you're asked on behalf of the board to gather information, to represent the board, to enter into negotiate a contract or represent the board in negotiating a contract. So those are really very, very important. This is where board members get into trouble, is board members get into trouble when they forget that they have no authority. And that's where you can get into trouble about talking about personnel. That's when you get into trouble about having an illegal form when 3 or 4 or more of you. Jay, what's a quorum in your district? 7?
7, yes.
So if for some reason 7 board members get together and start to talk about school business, that's a quorum, and that's illegal. That's prohibited by law to have any discussion about school business outside of the public setting. You're required to hold all board meetings in public. Next slide, please. So the roles and responsibilities, and I want to, roles and responsibilities in handout number 2, and it's your policy, BBA, is that you have general charge of the public schools in your unit, and shall exercise such other responsibilities as provided by law. You concern yourself with the broad questions of policy rather than the administrative details. So the best, easiest way to understand this is that it is your job to ensure that the schools are well run, but it's the superintendent's job to run the schools. So one of the major, and I refer to the powers and responsibilities, this is your job description. This tells you what you're required to do, what you should do as a board member. You enact policy. Let me talk about policy. Policy is your owner's manual, all right? This is your job description, policy BBA, and the policy manual is your owner's manual. That tells the superintendent and the principals and the employees on how business will be conducted and how they will do certain things within within their responsibilities. The other thing I want to enforce about policy is that policies are to be followed all of the time. You don't follow some of the policies some of the time. You don't choose to follow just a part of the policy. The policies are enacted, and once you have those policies, you are required by law to follow them. You select an employee and evaluate the superintendent. You will oversee, help to plan for the financing of construction and maintenance. You prescribe the minimum standards needed for the efficient operation for the school system. You make sure that there are appropriate records, counts, and archives, management methods for school business. You approve a budget, financial reports, and audits. The superintendent will monitor the expenditures and ensure that the budget is in good shape. You estimate the funds necessary from taxes. That's after you've approved your budget's gone to the taxpayers. Then at that point, whatever the budget is will actually determine what the tax rate is. Based on the information that the superintendent and the curriculum coordinator brings to you, you will adopt a course of study. And you'll ensure that the budget has the resources to provide for staff and instructional aides. Based on the information the superintendent brings with you, you evaluate the educational programs based on the data that the superintendent brings to you. You provide for the dissemination of information relating to the schools necessary for creating a well-informed public, and you can approve or disapprove personal nominations from the superintendent. So these are the main things that you do and it's handout 2 outside of your PowerPoint. These are the main things that you do as a board member. A to L, this is what you focus on. So this is your job description. The next slide, the next handout I just want to talk about is handout 3. And we can stay there, Diane, that's a good slide to be on. Handout 3 was sent to us as a result of a question regarding the roles and responsibilities of school boards. And one of the things is that the Maine Constitution affords control over education to the Maine legislature. And school boards are creatures of statute with their duties and responsibilities described within the legislature. The school committee acts as a public board. It in no sense represents the town. And that's it doesn't mean that you don't listen to the town. It doesn't mean that you don't listen to the concerns or the kudos of your constituents. And then when you do receive something like that, you bring it to the appropriate personnel. But once you are nominated onto the board, You don't represent your constituents. You basically represent and follow the laws and statutes regarding the educational program for your students. So after election, your public officers deriving your authority from law and responsible for the state of the good faith and rectitude of your acts. So once you're nominated, your job is to make the decisions in the best interest of the children based on state law. And that's a very important. We got this from the Assistant Attorney General that really does define what your roles and responsibilities are. On the PowerPoint, right now we've got the roles and responsibilities of the superintendent. We've broken this down. Once again, the school board will select the superintendent. The school board will set policy. The school board will adopt a budget, and the school board will act as a court of appeals. And these are the main things that you do, along with those, what I call your job description, other bullets in that job description. The superintendent will select staff. He will recommend and implement policy. Many times MSMA will send updated policies, will send new policies to the superintendent. He will then bring them to you and recommend that you implement the policy and the reasons why. He will propose and administer the budget, so he brings the budget to you. You work on it over several meetings. You adopt the budget, then it goes back to the superintendent to administer the budget. And the actions that are taking place by the superintendent are based on policy. So it's a really, it's really black and white. There's no gray area here. You have a job description. You have your roles and responsibilities. You have your owner's manual, which is your policy. So everything that you do in your district is already spelled out. If there's a policy that needs to be changed, you have a process to do that. Next slide, please, Diane. So we've talked about the board members' three primary functions. Adopt policy, provide orderly operations, ensure that the schools are well run, and exercise due diligence. You research, you read, you ask questions when you have a board presentation, and in order to make the best decision, those are the things that you're required to do. This doesn't mean that you go on a interview mission when you want to get something on an agenda, or when you want to get more information. You ask your superintendent to do that, and you do this in a public session. So if you want more information about third grade curriculum, it's not the board member's job to go to the third grade teachers to ask about the third grade curriculum. The board member's job is to say, Jay, we really want to have a better idea about the scope and sequence of the third grade curriculum. Can we have a board presentation on it and bring the teachers to us? Can you bring some information to us? Can your curriculum coordinator bring information to us? So that's how you become informed, is through board presentations and through the data and the information the superintendent brings to you. The next primary function is quasi-judicial, and it's usually dealing with teacher dismissal or student expulsion. In this situation, you really are quite often left in the dark. Your board chair will have more information. Jay and Gary will talk about a situation, whether it's a personnel or a student issue, that could lead to a personnel to dismissal or expulsion. And quite often this ends up as kind of a judge and jury, and you are the jury. And there'll be a proceeding where you'll be represented by your lawyer, and the individual will be represented by their lawyer. You'll be in executive session. You'll be provided with the information regarding the case. Think of it as a courtroom. And at the end of the information, at the end of the lawyers presenting their cases to you, you'll make a decision. And quite the reason, that is the reason why we keep you. You are kept in the dark, is so that you are not coming in with a decision already made, that you don't have information that quite often could be inaccurate. And so we want to make sure that in these cases, everyone is treated fairly, and that in these situations, you will have very little information, and whatever rumor you hear on the street, you need to forget and you need to put away, because nothing can be considered unless it's in that executive session and based on the data that you have heard. The last function is as executive. And this is when you can go into approve contracts, purchases, employ staff. You have you delegate your authority to the superintendent to carry out the functions to run the district. And once again, you have a budget that establishes spending categories, and the board will vote on this budget. So right now, I just want to take a little deep breath. And Jay, are there any questions?
I'm not seeing any at this time.
Okay, next slide. All right, so the board superintendent relationship, this is handout number 4 in your handouts, and this is policy BDD. Guess what? We have to follow this. It's a policy. So the board understands the management of the school is the function of the superintendent. The board holds the superintendent responsible for complying with all of the laws, rules, and regulations, and for administering board policies and decisions for the operations of the schools and educational program. So once again, the board ensures that the schools are well run. The superintendent runs the schools. The board recognizes the superintendent is the educational leader. You provide direction for the superintendent through written policies, objectives, and goals. You give the superintendent full administrative authority and support for discharging his professional duties. You hold all board meetings in the presence of the superintendent or a designee, except as otherwise permitted by law or when the superintendent voluntarily excuses himself. You refer complaints, criticisms, and requests to the superintendent. You don't take those on yourself. If you receive complaints, criticisms, or complaints, you bring them to the superintendent or you bring them to the board chair. You don't take them on and you don't try to solve them. Why is that? Can someone give me an answer? I'd be calling on you if I was there.
Because school board members don't have authority outside the board.
There we go. Yay. Who was that?
Me.
Alex,
Alex gets an A because school board member, and he's listening. Alex gets an A because school boards have no authority outside of the boardroom. So I just want to make sure that you've heard that. And then your job is to evaluate the superintendent and provide appropriate opportunities for the superintendent to share his receptions regarding the working relationship between the board and the superintendent. And I think that evaluation piece of you evaluating the superintendent and the superintendent weighing in on the working relationship, what's working well, what's not, what does he need to be as efficient as possible, that's a really important task that the board should undertake. Next slide, please. So, and the next slide, please. A word about micromanaging. Unfortunately, there are in some places that we have board members that feel that they need to control every part, however small, of an enterprise or activity. And just keep in mind, once again, you're a member of a team, and you are obligated to work collaboratively with that team. And one of the things I like to mention is that there will be times when the board is going to vote on an issue. And there may be 1 or 2 board members that don't like how the board vote happened. For those members that may not have gotten their way or the board vote didn't turn out the way they wanted, their job is to roll up their sleeves and say, how can I make the decision that this board has just made as successful as possible? Those are the symptoms of a high functioning school board, is when you can agree to disagree, you respect the majority of the board, and whatever vote comes out of the boardroom, you roll your sleeves up and you make sure that that decision is supported as successfully as possible. Next slide, please. So the next thing I want to talk about is, and this is handout number 6 in your handouts, is the board member code of ethics. So you have your job description, you have your owner's manual. Now this is how you're going to behave. So this is the third thing that you are required. It's a policy. You adopt policy, you're required to follow them. So you're required to do all of these things in your board member code of ethics because it's part of your policy. Therefore, you must follow them. So you've accepted the challenge of serving on the board. And as a board member, you'll view service on the board as an opportunity to serve your community and your state. You'll at all times think of children first, all times, and base your decisions on how they'll affect children and their education. You will make no disparaging remarks in or out of board meetings about other board members or their opinions. Once again, this is policy. You don't choose whether to follow this. You are required to follow this. Remember that at all times as an individual, you have no legal authority outside of the meetings or the board, and that you'll conduct your relationship with the school staff and local citizenry in all media and of communications on the basis of this fact. Your responsibility is not to operate the schools, but to see that they're well operated. You'll seek to provide education for all children in the community. You can measure it with their needs and abilities. You'll listen to the citizens, and you'll refer all complaints to the proper authorities. So all complaints should go to the superintendent and or the board chair. And you'll discuss such complaints only at a regular meeting after failure to administer of administrative solution. You can support a decision made you will support a decision made by the majority of the board graciously. So that's, once again, I'm going to go back and say this again. If you voted for the board to go one way and the board went the other way, you're going to support that vote graciously, and you're going to help to make that decision successful. You won't criticize employees publicly, but you will make such criticism to the superintendent, and the superintendent will investigate and take action if necessary. You'll make decisions openly after the facts bearing on a question had been presented and discussed in public meeting, not on social media, not in Hannaford, not at an open house, not at a band concert. You'll refuse to make promises, and this is really hard because a lot of community members will come up and they'll have an issue or they'll have a concern about Eileen King. I really have an issue with her. She's not a very good Spanish teacher. And quite often board members want to say, well, I'll look into that. I'll take care of that. That's not your job. Your job is to say, thank you very much to bringing this to my attention. But, do you realize I have no authority outside of the boardroom, but I will make sure I bring this to our superintendent. That's probably the best way you can handle situations. So please do not make promises as to how you're going to vote or how you're going to handle situations until the information has come to the board as a whole. You will not discuss confidential business of the board in your home, on the street, in your office. Confidential means confidential. It will take place in the executive session, and it never comes out of executive session, and it is never discussed outside of executive session with anyone at any time for any reason. You'll confine, and this is important, M is important, confine your board action to policymaking, planning, appraisal, leaving the administration of the schools to the superintendent. You'll welcome and encourage cooperation and participation of the teachers, administrators, and other personnel in developing policies. And as superintendent, many times the policies that we bring before the school board, the principals are going to have to administer. So many times I would get the policy, I would ask the principals to read the policies to see, are these things you all feel comfortable administering, or there's some recommendations? And together, Jay and the administrative team would bring that policy to the board saying, these are the things we really like, we support, this might be hard for us to do, this is why, and you can rewrite some of those policies and some of those directives. So you do want to involve staff and personnel into the development of policies, but the final decision on policy adoption is yours. You will make sure that all schools have adequate financial support to do the jobs that they need to do. You will resist every temptation and outside pressure to use your position as a board member to benefit yourself. You will try to attend every regular and special board meeting. And you'll remember at all times that the board of which you are a member is an agent of the state, and you will abide by the laws of the state and the regulations formulated by the Department of Education and by the State Board of Education. So this is your policy. This is your code of ethics. and this is what you are required, this is how you are required to handle yourself as a board member. Are there any questions at this point?
I'm not seeing any.
Okay. Now, some boards take this code of ethics a little bit further, and at the beginning of the year, this code of ethics will be pulled out. They'll be reviewed by all the board members, and the board members actually will enter the exercise of signing and dating this code of ethics as a sign that they will agree to abide by your district's code of ethics. So this is really important that you understand that this document exists. And for new board members, I'd really take time to familiarize yourself with this document, because this really spells out how you're going to handle yourself as a board member. It is policy, and you're required to follow it. Next slide, please. So ethics in practice, you represent the entire district when making decisions. You understand the role of the board. You encourage an open exchange of ideas. Seek regular communications. Your superintendent with updates that need to come out and heads up of things that may be happening. You work with other board members in a conscientious and courteous manner. You avoid conflicts of interest, and there are times that can't happen. There are times you're just going to have to agree to disagree. Next slide, please. And so those are the summaries of the Code of Ethics in practice. Any questions?
I don't see any.
Okay. So the duties of the chair I call him the chief volunteer. But I just want to make sure that the duties of the chair is to help support the superintendent in the preparation of meeting agendas. The chair he chairs the school committee meetings. He assists in setting schedule for meetings, workshops, special meetings like, bringing MSMA in to do the training. Unless agreed upon, is the official spokesperson for the school committee. Let's pause on this one. So we talked about having lines of communication to your citizenry. We talked about that's important that you have constant communication that goes out. This should be done by the board chair. He is the official spokesperson of the school committee. Quite often, board chairs and superintendents will work together to develop communiques for the residents of your communities. But if something comes up and the board is questioned about a situation, your board chair is your spokesperson. So unless that has been assigned to someone else, if you're asked about something, you might want to refer them to Gary as he is a spokesperson. And I usually recommend that if you have a situation that the board chair and the superintendent craft a statement so that everyone's saying the same thing. But it's not under the responsibility of individual board members to be communicating about board business or about a situation. We have a board chair. He's been elected, and that's his role. Next slide, please. So one thing I do want to say is the voice of the chair is not the de facto opinion of the board. Gary has one vote, and it's equal to all of your votes. And the decisions of the board need to be made by the board in public setting, based on the information they got, and then resulting in a board vote. But if it gets down to quasi-judicial, if you're dealing with a personnel issue, if you're dealing with a teacher dismissal, if you're dealing with an emergency situation where we need a spokesperson, your board member is going to usually have your board chair is going to have more information and will be the spokesperson. Next slide, please. So one of the things I want to kind of go over is most common protocol mistakes boards make. Number one is not understanding what the chair's role is. Number two, allowing surprises. If you know there's a situation, if you've heard a lot of things about something, you really should let your superintendent know. If you know someone's coming to a board meeting with an issue, let the superintendent know so they can investigate it, so they can be aware of what's going on. Maybe you can address that situation right away. If the superintendent doesn't know about it, that just can put that issue off for another 2 weeks until you have your next board meeting. So when at all possible, I would, avoid surprises, communicate with the superintendent if you think something might be coming his way. That just allows the superintendent to talk to the appropriate personnel to investigate the situation and make sure that he has the facts, the accurate facts, to be able to answer questions. We need to make sure the board chair requires recognition of anyone who's speaking prior to them speaking. We need to make sure that we demand proper respect and protocol for all board members at all times. And we need to remember that the conduct of the board during meetings sends messages to the public. So this is a little point that I want to just touch on a little bit, is the conduct of the board, what the public sees and how the board interacts with each other really is very, very reflective on the culture of your schools. If you have a high-functioning, hard-working, collaborative team making decisions in the best interest of the children in your communities, and you can agree to disagree, that is going to be seen in your communities. And that culture will filter down into your schools. So it's very important that as you take care of your community's most precious resource, the community needs to see a high-functioning, collaborative team that's working together, that has their eye focused on what's best for the children in the school based on statute, based on what's required by law, based on what the programs that you're required to offer. Can we have the next slide, please? And so trust within the community, once again, how you conduct yourself in your business in the public eye goes a long way in determining your credibility and support in the community. Are there any questions right now?
Nope, not seeing any.
Okay, did you tell him not to ask any questions to get out early? All right, next slide, please. All right, so email. This is where a lot of boards get into trouble in a very, very innocent way. I'm not shaking my finger at you, but email cannot be used as a substitute for deliberations at school board meetings and for any communication regarding school board business. So if you are on email or you are on social media, just don't communicate board business, because as an individual outside of the boardroom, you have no authority. So email is a great tool for, we're meeting on September 16th at 6 o'clock, and Eileen King from MSMA is going to be joining us to do a board workshop. That's a great way to use email, but it is not to be used among board members to deliberate issues of the board. It's not to be used to make decisions about issues before you come into a board meeting. You need to be aware that your email can be accessed from the Freedom of Information Act, and anything that you say and put into an email can become a part of the public record. And you have a policy, BEA, regarding, and I'm not seeing it in my handouts right now.
Number 8.
Number 8.
All right, I went by it. Thank you. You have a policy that addresses the use of social media, of email. And, I think of Ghostbusters with the black circle and the red line right through it. I want to put board use email inside the circle, and I want to put a red line across it. Just don't. It's dangerous if people feel you're using email or social media to communicate board business, to deliberate board business, to discuss personnel. That is it. And if you have a quorum of the board participating in email or social media, that is illegal. So this is where board members get into a lot of trouble just not thinking about it, because email is such a part of our lives and social media is such a part of our lives. But as an individual, you are not to conduct any board business, discuss board business, or communicate on email or social media regarding board business. You have a policy that you will not use email or electronic communications as a substitute for deliberations at board meetings. For other communications or business properly confined to board meetings, all of your board meetings should be held in public. And if you use social media or if you use email, you're violating the public participation in public statute. You should be aware that emails and their attachments and other forms of electronic communication can become a public record which may be inspected upon request. And board members shall avoid reference to confidential information about employees, students, or other matters in email or electronic communication. And I think I wish C said board members will not reference, shall not reference, shall avoid. I just do not do this because this is where boards get into trouble. Next slide, please. Social media guidelines, once again, keep in mind that when you are on social media, you are not a member of the board, and you need to operate within the guidelines of your policy BEA. And on the next slide, we have guidelines for board members using social media. In using social media to communicate the school district business, you just should not do it. But if you do, here are some guidelines that you're communicating as an individual member and not as official district spokesperson. You will not deliberate school business. You will not respond to complaints or concerns, but you will direct them to the right person, not on social media. Pick up the phone, call your superintendent. You will not post content that indicates you've already made a decision prior to a public meeting and prior to hearing all the information. So here are some guidelines. You will not ask, if you're asking for community input, it's because you have been asked to do that. You are not to solicit community input on your own, because that is taking authority. So if you're asking to get input about something, that means that the board took a vote and asked you to, with the superintendent, with another board member, to seek information or to gather input, but it's not to be done on your own. And just, next slide, please. We just strongly recommend that you do not use any form of social media or electronic email or a texting or Instagram in any shape, way, or form as a board member. So this just says conduct yourself online in a way that reflects, well in the district. If there's any harassing, defamatory communications, let the superintendent know. And retain electronic records, including your own posts in case you're challenged. So as you can see, all of these little guidelines have, to me, they're red flags. So I think the safest way you can go forward is not to use social media in any way, shape, or form, Facebook, to discuss school business. Next slide. So I'm going to stop here. Are there any questions about use of electronic email or any kind of electronic form of communication as a board member?
I have a question.
Go ahead.
So when it comes to Facebook, so I see the guidelines and it may be in the policy, but I can't find it in the stack of papers. What dictates that we can't ask community members about their opinion on an issue on the board agenda? I find that a little, what dictates that, I guess?
Well, because you're doing that.
Well, if I wanted to put up, do you think kids should be allowed to play school sports? I mean, what dictates that?
Because you're acting as an individual, you're not representing the board. If the board asks you to do that, then you have the authority to do that. But as an individual, you don't have that authority to ask that question unless the board has given you that authority.
But if you just, I don't agree with that, but anyway, I want some examples. I disagree.
And
I think you have the right as an individual to ask So I have an issue with that.
Go ahead, David. I would look at that as a fine line. There's no, if I understood things properly, community members are welcome to or encouraged to speak to individual board members about the sports program or about the math program or about the mopping of the floors. But we are not allowed to solicit it unless we've been assigned by the board to do so. Is that?
Yes, that's actually, that's very well said. And it doesn't mean that you don't listen. And it doesn't mean that you don't bring back what you've heard to the board.
Fair enough. I'll take that as an answer.
And I'm smiling and laughing here. I understand, and I understand what your point is. I get that. I get it.
You have a right as an individual.
David has another question.
Are we allowed to, in our passing through the community in whatever format we're in it, as individuals, to encourage people? I and all the other board members are here to listen to you. If there's anything on your mind, bring it to me and I will get it to the appropriate people to get you answers. I may not be able to answer, but I will get it to those that need it.
And that is absolutely an excellent way to handle information coming from your job, is to listen to them. But once again, we go back to the fact that the decisions you make are based on what's best for students. But absolutely, your job is to bring back things that you hear so that they can be addressed appropriately and handled appropriately, and we get the best information back to your constituents.
Any other questions, anyone? Looks like we can move on. Thanks, Eileen.
You're welcome. So the next thing I want to talk about is confidentiality. This is another important part of the role of being a school board member, is you're going to deal with a lot of confidential information. Confidentiality falls under employment matters, with applicants, with interviews, with reference information. You know, I know that there are many boards that will have a board member sit in on an interview for a teacher, or obviously when you have administrative opening, you'll have board members sitting on that. One thing I want to point out is when you do sit on an interview, your vote is no stronger than the rest of the interview committee. It's, you know, one person, one vote. I mean, as a board member, you don't have a stronger voice on the interview committee, but any of the materials that you review, any of the materials that you see, are confidential when it deals with application matters. Executive session, everything that is said in executive session is confidential. And then once again, those quasi-judicial matters, the ones where you're acting with personnel issues or possibly student expulsion hearings, that remains confidential. Next slide, please. So executive session, confidential items that may be discussed, or considered as employment, appointment, assignment, duties, promotion, demotion. And you can see the list: compensation, evaluation, disciplining, resignation or dismissal of public officials, appointees, or employees of the public, of the body or agency. Next slide. You'll also, the second thing is expulsion or suspension of a student. And the third is condition or acquisition or use of real or personal property only if premature disclosure would prejudice the competitive or bargaining of the body or agency. So here, this is an example: is you are going to, let's say, build a new school. You're looking at a plot of land in town to purchase. By disclosing that information, that might hurt your chance to negotiate for the best deal possible. So those are the scenarios in which those discussions could take place in executive session. And however, general budget matters are not allowed to be discussed in executive session. Next, on handout 11, And I've gone over, I'm going to go back at a couple, but a handout 11, when you go into executive session, you start with a public motion. I move that we go into executive session. You pass the motion with a recorded vote of 3/5 of the members present and voting. And you need to state the precise nature of business in a motion, including citation. So if you look at handout 11, and number 1, if you're going to go into executive session to discuss the acquisition of property, it will be under MRSA 405-6C. That needs to be mentioned in the motion to go into executive session, because what it's doing is it's explaining to the public why you're going to executive session, and it's telling the public that you've aligned it to a statute that makes it permissible to go into executive session. So it's really important that you understand that. Usually when agendas are put together and there's an item for executive session, Jay will ensure that that statute, the statutory citation, is included in the motion. Only matters stated in the motion may be considered in executive session. So if you're going to talk about acquisition of property, you can't talk about the appointment of officials, or you can't talk about the evaluation or the expulsion of students. You can't talk about the evaluation of employees. So you can't go into executive session on one citation and then say, well, while we're in here, can we talk about, your board chair needs to say, no, we cannot do that. Now, what happens when you have two or more executive sessions? My recommendation is you have a motion for each one. You go into executive session for the acquisition of property under these statutory citation. When you're finished with that discussion, and once again, you are, by law, you are not allowed to take a vote in executive session. You come out. If there's a vote that's needed, you do it in public session. If there's another reason, if you're going to talk about the evaluation of an employee, then you need to go back into executive session, because that's a different statutory citation. And then you will vote to go into executive session. You'll go in, you'll have your discussion. You'll come out. If a vote's needed, you take a vote in public, so on and so forth. So my recommendation is, if you have 3 reasons to go into executive sessions, you have 3 statutory citations, and you go in and out 3 times. That keeps it clean. It shows the community that you're following the statutes, you're following the laws, and that you're not having other conversations in your executive session. Next slide, please. So before I go on, I want to point out a couple other things in your handout. I'm going to go back to handout 7 and 8, just to make sure you know they're there. Handout 7 has your code of ethics for board members, and it has just a lot of, I call these your placemats, questions to ask. You know, thinking about your board meeting, evaluation questions. How did we do today as a board meeting? And I think I'm going to have to get you page 2, because I think I copied page 1. I think I copied the same side twice. So Jay, I'll make sure you get the other side of that. The other side of that has Robert Rules of Order. And a lot of boards, what they do is they will take this placemat, they'll laminate it so that every board member has this at a board meeting. It reminds you of your code of ethics. It reminds you of Robert's Rules of Order. It gives you some things to maybe, you know, thoughtful questions to ask on an issue. So Jay, I'll make sure you get the other side of the placemat. So I want to make sure you knew you had that in your handouts. And I also, on handout 10, we do have a list of records that are designated as confidential under Maine law. And I'm not going to go through that tonight, but I just want to make sure you were aware that you had that in here. So what I'm going to move on to right now is public concerns and complaints. And that, so when you do get a concern or a complaint, you want to seek resolution at the lowest level. So if you receive a concern or complaint, you're going to say, I obviously I can't I'm not, I don't have the authority to handle this, but I'll make sure that I bring it to the attention of the superintendent. And what the superintendent then is going to say to the parent or the person calling, have you spoken to the teacher? Have you spoken to the principal? So you want to start at the very lowest level possible, and you want to solve it at the lowest level possible. Then if it's not resolved, you can appeal the decision to the next level, and that might be, so let's say the lowest level is a teacher. If it's not resolved, then it could go to the principal, the special ed director. If it's not resolved, then it can go to the superintendent. And if it's still unresolved, the matter can be placed on a school board agenda, which obviously would take place in executive session because it would be dealing probably with a personnel issue or a student issue. So that's kind of the way you want to handle public concerns and complaints. Next slide, please. Handling concerns, ask if they've discussed the issue with the person immediately responsible. If they say no, then say, I'll be happy to bring it to the superintendent. Thank them for bringing the information to you, because the superintendent, my biggest pet peeve, if there was something going on out in our schools that I didn't know about, people were grumbling about it, how can I fix it if I don't know about it? So always make sure you bring it to the superintendent, but thank them for that. Encourage the person to go to the teacher. If they say, I'd rather not, then always say, but I'll make sure I bring it to the superintendent. Then you have policies in your own district on handling public concerns and complaints. And it's basically the same process that I mentioned, is you want to handle it at the lowest level possible. Whenever a concern is made directly to a school board as a whole or to an individual school board member, the individual or group involved will be advised to take the concern to the appropriate staff member. I think it's cleaner for you to just bring it to the superintendent. When you bring it to the staff member, they see you as a school board member coming in, and that leaves the superintendent out of the loop. So if you have a complaint, call the superintendent. The two of you discuss how it's going to be handled, and that's the cleanest way to do that. So you do have a policy on handling handling of concerns. Next slide, please. So the session before last, we adopted LD 721, which is public participation at board meetings. So it is required. You do have policy BEHD, which is number 14. And so this aligns that a school board shall provide the opportunity for public to comment on school and education matters at a school board meeting. Nothing in the subsection restricts the school board from establishing reasonable standards for the public, how they're going to behave, what they can and cannot do, standards for public comment period, including time limits and conduct standards. And so for this purpose of the subsection, school board meeting means a full meeting of the school board, and it does not include meetings of subcommittees. So you have a policy here that supports LD 721. You can limit time. You can limit the number of times they can get up to speak. You can have people sign in to speak. So there are a variety of ways which you can handle public participation at board meetings. Next slide, please. So we're going to get to the 6 key attributes of board members. One is to think strategically and analytically, and then, have the earned respect of other key stakeholder group members, work well with others as a member of a collaborative team with group decision-making authority, and understanding your financial duties of fiduciary duties of loyalty, care, and obedience. Demonstrate the understandings of the difference between oversight and supervision. You will see that the schools are well run. Jay will ensure that you will ensure the schools will run. Jay will run the schools, and you want to make sure that you demonstrate personal integrity and honesty, and just understand the process for which the group is responsible as far as making decisions and what choices you have. Next slide, please. So there are board actions matter. There are 4 studies that show us that there's a positive relationship between effective boardmanship and student achievement. And that's in responsible school governance, that you are making decisions in the best interest of all of your students, that you have high student expectations, you hold the district accountable, that there is community engagement, and that you create conditions for students and staff success. So I'm going to pause right now. What's the next slide, Diane? And the last one is that the 8 traits of effective school boards is you have high expectations and clear goals. You believe that all children can learn, and you're going to provide those learning opportunities for all your children. You're going to be focused on achievement. You will be collaborative, and you will allow the board chair to communicate on behalf of the board. That you will be data savvy based on the data that's brought before you. Your goals and resources are aligned. That there is team leadership and team training. So I'm going to stop right here and see if there are any other questions.
I'm scanning the room and using appropriate wait time. But it does not look like there are any questions.
I used to hate it when the moderator did that at my budget meetings. The wait time. So the last thing I want to talk about, there's one more slide at the very, very end, is school board evaluation. And I think it's really important that you consider you doing an evaluation of how you perform as a school board. Why evaluate? Because it really talks about what you do well, what you need to improve on. How can you be more efficient and a high-performing board? And use that information to continue to be a high-performing and efficient school board. If you don't have an evaluation tool for a self-evaluation, MSMA has a variety of samples that we'd be happy to provide you. So that's what I have for you tonight. I hope this was helpful. Usually when I leave workshops, my best questions are on the way home. So if you have any questions that you haven't asked or that you think of later on, please send them to Jay, and I'd be happy to make sure that I get back to him. And then I'll be sending Jay an evaluation for some feedback. I know doing this via Zoom is a little clunky. Actually, Diane, thank you very much. You did a great job. You and I make a great team and never having done this together, and our internet strength stayed strong. So unless there's anything else, Jay, or any other questions.
I'm not seeing any, so thank you very much, Eileen. We appreciate your time and everything that you've shared with us.
Okay, have a great year. Everyone stay safe, and once again, reach out if you have any questions. Good night, everyone.
Thank you. Thank you. So just before we leave that, there is a green paper in the back. So if you want to fill it out and just drop it off to me, or even leave it in your folder, you could actually just leave it in your folder. What we did last time is we simply collected them all, scanned them, and then I sent them off to Eileen. So if you want to just fill it out, drop it in your folder, we'll collect them out of there that way, and then we'll forward that information on.
Go ahead. Okay.
Second.
Any discussion?
Since we're still kind of in Zoom, I will do the roll call vote, although Dane is not joining us, but I will do the roll call vote just to be consistent, okay? So Kim,
I abstain, I wasn't here.
thank you. Wendy,
Yes.
Kathy,
Yes.
Melissa,
Yes.
Alex,
Yes.
Patty,
Yes.
Rebecca,
Yes.
Betty,
Yes.
Sean,
Yes.
Gary,
Yes?
and David.
Yes?
If I counted right, it passes 10 for it and 1 abstention if I counted right. Or did I do that wrong?
Nope.
I did it right. Hey, yay, I feel good about myself.
Second.
Any discussion? Roll call.
Kim,
Yes.
Wendy. Yes. Kathy. Yes. Melissa,
Yes.
Alex.
Yep.
Patty,
Yes.
Rebecca,
Yes.
Betty,
Yes.
Sean,
Yes.
Gary,
Yes.
and David.
Yes.
And it passes unanimously. Thank you.
I move to accept the nomination of first probationary contract teacher to 1-year position, MCMS, Matthew DeBoer.
Second.
Any discussion? Roll call.
All righty. Kim,
Yes.
Wendy,
Yes.
Kathy. Yes. Melissa,
Yes.
Alex,
Yes.
Patty,
Yes.
Rebecca,
Yes.
Betty,
Yes.
Sean,
Yes.
Gary,
Yes.
and David.
Yes.
I have a quick question. Is this with COVID funds?
This particular position, no.
Okay.
Yep.
That's me.
I move to approve the request for student service worker, BOARD-SUPERINTENDENT, for a 6-month leave of absence as recommended by the superintendent.
Second.
Any discussion? Roll call.
Kim,
Yes.
Wendy,
Yes.
Kathy.
Yes.
Melissa,
Yes.
Alex.
Yep.
Patty,
Yes.
Rebecca,
Yes.
Betty,
Yes.
Sean,
Yes.
Gary,
Yes.
and David.
Yes.
And that also passes unanimously. Thank you, guys.
Okay. So now we're up to Jay.
So I'll start with I want to give you guys some updates just very quickly. And I do have principals with me. So if there's any specific questions that we can put to them, we can do that. But I kind of told them I wouldn't try to put them on the spot tonight because they've had a couple of very, very busy weeks here. So just a couple of things so that board members know that we are getting iPads for all kindergarten through 4th graders. And we're using the Corona relief funds to do that. I give Diane a lot of credit. She has been checking since we placed the order. She's been pretty consistently checking on a daily basis, sometimes on a twice-a-day daily basis here. So as soon as we get them, we will get them set up and we will get them distributed. So I just want you to know they're on order. We're just waiting for them to arrive at this point, and we will set them up in a way that preloads them with things like Dreambox and Lexia, which are 2 programs that we're using for math and literacy instruction. So we're going to get all of that. So when the kiddos get it, they'll have it in hand and everything will be ready to go for them. So again, I give Diane a lot of credit. She calls Apple daily right now. So as soon as we have them, we will get them out. 5th graders all are getting, if they haven't gotten them, they will be getting them shortly, Chromebooks, and they're doing some practice with the elementary technology integrationist who's setting them up so they have the tools and they know how to operate them and all that kind of stuff. So that is going on with technology. Just wanted to give you guys that very quick update. And there have been some questions about playgrounds and why students are not using playgrounds. So I just wanted to address that very quickly as well. There is a liability with playgrounds. We talked with our insurance company. The liability comes, we need to basically clean everything after a student uses it. So when a group of students goes outside on the playground, we actually have to clean that playscape. And if you've seen some of these I'm calling them playscapes, it's like the jungle gyms or even the swings, you know, simple. We actually have to go out and clean those. One of the challenges of that is we simply don't have enough time to have custodians out kind of cleaning playscapes on a regular basis when different groups of kids are coming through and using it. We are talking with the insurance company. They are looking at, you know, what can we do, because we also kind of acknowledge that people are probably using this equipment outside of regular school hours. And so we kind of don't have as much control as we'd like unless we fence it off, and obviously we're not going to do that. So we're trying to get that figured out so that the playscapes can be used again. We'll wait for that guidance to come. Once we have that, we will absolutely get those playgrounds operational again. But during school hours, students are not using it, but they are going outside and have other designated areas that they can play in. I was at Wayne the other day, and the kids did fantastic. It was, they played an imaginary kickball game, and it actually was a lot of fun watching them do that. One of the teachers led that. It was pretty amazing. And she had all the kids eating out of the palm of her hand while that game was going on. So it was a lot of fun. So we are trying to be creative and get kids out and get them moving, though, because that is really important during this time as a stress reliever and a chance to give them some, you know, physical activity. So, but we will definitely, as soon as we get guidance around playgrounds, we will get them operational to our kiddos as soon as we can, just so that you guys know. I wanted to let you guys know how lunch was going also, because that is a fairly challenging area for us. In Wayne and Mount Vernon, because the schools are a little bit smaller, they're actually able to have, oh, sorry, no, I see Janet shaking your head. We have in Wayne, they're able to use both, all the kids are eating in the cafeteria. There's 2 different shifts. In Mount Vernon, some students are using the cafeteria and some students are using their classrooms. I hope I got that right, Janet. Thank you so much. And basically the same thing is happening at Reedfield and Manchester. They actually, because they're bigger schools, have even less capacity to use the regular cafeteria. So whenever students eat at a desk or table, it needs to be cleaned before it's used again. So again, think in your mind, anytime students change a location, or if they're eating, it has to be completely cleaned and disinfected, which, oh, sorry, you guys, which does take a lot of time right now. We are getting faster with it. It's a procedure thing, but we are getting faster with it. In the middle school and the high school, the students are actually eating in their classrooms with their advisors right now. I do know in the high school, they are using the cafeteria, but it's a couple of advisory groups that go in. I hope I'm saying that right. Thank you, Dr. Conway. There are a couple of going in, and again, they're doing cleaning with that as well. So it's definitely, lunch is definitely a challenge right now. And I just wanted you guys to have kind of a picture of where kids are eating and how they're doing that. I do know in a couple of schools, they actually used the tents, or they went outside for lunch if they could kind of manage that. I give our food service staff a lot of credit because they're basically delivering those meals to the classrooms. And they do that very, very well, and they've become very efficient with it. So I just wanted you guys to kind of have an accurate picture of what kind of lunch times look like with that. We continue to work on the COVID screener. We sent out to staff and to families a paper screener, which is 4 questions. We feel like I had a meeting today, we feel like we've got the app kind of almost ready to go. The nurses have put together a video that they will be posting towards the end of this week that kind of explains the app and helps people understand what they're looking for. The big thing about the app is it's a self-screener, again, just like the paper copy. The advantage we feel of using the app is it will be a daily reminder. They will basically get something that'll come across their phone or in their email, and it will say, if you have like 2 children in school, it'll say, do it for Alex and then do it for Alyssa, as an example. So it's coming through. The data, we will only see, as far as the data goes, and if I misspeak, Diane was at this meeting and she's totally can correct me. The data is aggregated. It's not, when you look at it, we're not going to be able to see, oh, Jay Charette had listed, this was his answer on these questions. We don't drill down that deep. What we're seeing is Jay Charette staying home today because he answered it and he is staying home, or is he coming to school, or did he not do it at all? So that's basically the information that we're looking at, and we're not looking to drill deeper than that because it is, again, a self-screener, and it's really to focus on potential COVID cases. So it's the way we're talking to people about it, or we will be talking to people about it, is it's a COVID screener, not a health screener. So that, again, if you have like seasonal allergies, I'm kind of looking at Sean. I know he has, he can speak to this a little bit, but if it's seasonal allergies and it's seasonal allergies, that's not going to preclude you from being able to go to school. So we wanted to make sure that that message was very clearly communicated to people going forward. Of course, Alex, yes.
Voluntary?
No, they should be doing it, but we will have an opt-out form. If someone decides they don't want to do that and they want to just stick with the paper screener, they absolutely can do that.
So they have to do one or the other?
They have to do one or the other because that's one of our guidelines from the state, is there must be some sort of screener. So if they don't want to do the digital one, which is certainly, I know people talk about protecting data and that kind of thing, which is very valid, and I'm okay with that, then they already have the paper screener. And again, it's a self-screener. So we're not the COVID police. And I think that's very important that we say that way. We're asking people to make smart decisions based on what they know about their own children, and same with staff members, what they know about themselves. We're looking for symptoms that are out of the ordinary, not things that are normal. So it took us a while. We're looking at getting, like I said, the videos probably out on Friday so that people have a chance to look at that. And then we'll do it, we'll start running it kind of live next Thursday is when we'll run it live. So we want to do some education. It'll be in my parent newsletter that'll go out on Friday. We'll ask principals to put it in their newsletters, et cetera, and we'll look at next Thursday, and it'll be live for all staff and all families. And then again, we'll use the opt-out feature. And all they got to do is let us know, and we can take care of that very, very quickly. So we have 52 students that are looking to do at-home supported learning. We're kind of back to square one at this point. With that, I will be meeting with the principals probably tomorrow, so they got a heads up, and specifically elementary principals, so that we can get this going, even though we're waiting to try to find the appropriate person for that position. We do need to get it up and running. So I'm going to meet with the elementary principals tomorrow and talk about what can we get going in terms of short term so that we can get ourselves to a better place with that. Parents have been very patient with us, and we don't want to stretch that any more than we have to. So we will be looking to get something running early next week, regardless of if we have a person in place or not. So it's just proving to be a little bit more challenging than we thought it was going to be, but we're going to look to give support to those families as soon as possible.
Go ahead, Kim.
Yeah.
Of the 52, you said that the iPads weren't in yet. All 52 have access to internet, okay?
Yes, according to the survey, and what we're doing is, actually Diane has been very good. Do you want to speak to it, or are you okay if I talk, Diane? Okay, so we're actually trying to get, we have some iPads in the district, so we're trying to look to get iPads to those 52, knowing that they're starting. So we're trying to get to them first while we're waiting for that shipment, so that way they have a tool to be able to start that work. So that was a great question. Thank you for asking that. Other questions?
Go ahead, John.
So what are these kids doing now?
The at-home supported ones, honestly, they haven't gotten anything at this point. They're just kind of on our rolls, and that's why we need to get it up and running regardless of if the person's in place or not. So we'll kind of patchwork, but we'll have something on Monday for them one way or the other.
And then a follow-up, it was, there, in a letter I received, it was insinuated that the Wednesdays that the new person we hired is going to be coordinating that learning for the students at home. Can you explain that?
Yeah, so that was part of that person was going to help coordinate that. And what we were doing was looking at, because it's 52 students, we thought, wait a minute, that's a big caseload. Yeah. So we were actually going to ask some of our ed techs to make sure that the kids were getting the materials and had a second point of contact because of that big caseload. So that's kind of what we were thinking originally is what we were going to do. Because we had ed techs that were here on Wednesday, so they could help support that. And we have some really good ed techs that could do a good job with that. So, but it would still be the main point of contact would still be that teaching principal.
Rebecca.
Oh,
I'm just curious how the assisted at-home learning is any different than the remote learning for the regular students.
So it's not, we can't, like, if we were full remote, we'd be looking at doing synchronous and asynchronous lessons, and they're not going to have the same level of that in the at-home supported learning. It's going to be more of a, here's the work, we're going to be asking parents to really help support us with that work. There will be times where they were going to connect directly with teachers and stuff, but it's not going to look the same as remote learning because we're not in remote learning. So it just kind of, it's like it's actually, in my mind, it's a little bit of a step below remote learning, unfortunately. But again, it's proving to be a lot more challenging than we thought it was going to be, especially at the elementary level. Yeah.
So doesn't that, when you taught, the end of October, they have to have work.
Yeah,
or
oh,
we
yes.
can't count it.
Right, exactly,
And
yes.
we lose their money.
Exactly, yes.
So
That's why we're looking.
What bothers me is that they're not going to be at the same level as our
Yes,
in-school students.
yeah.
So are we doing it is the state coming after us looking for the money because we're not producing the same quality?
So the answer to that is the state's not going to come looking for us, so to speak. But what you hit is exactly what everyone's fear is that these students, we can't give them the same education as if they were sitting in school. Or even if we were remote, they're still not getting the same education. So we know that's one of the reasons why we're trying to kind of keep them on our rolls and give them something is for what you just said. If we don't do anything for them, then they're going to be even further behind. So that's what we're trying to avoid happening, is at least give them something and bring them along in the hopes that at some point we're going to get all 52 of those students back before the year is out. Knock on wood, that's our main goal is to get them back and keep them involved with school. So.
Go ahead, Ben.
Do we have any teachers who cannot be teaching in the classroom who will be doing remote learning, or did all of our teachers come back?
Yeah. Unfortunately, we have a couple teachers who aren't here, but it's COVID related, but it's different. So unfortunately, we don't have like a teacher that we could have said, can you work with kindergarten through 5th grade students? We just don't have anyone qualified for that to be able to do that at this point. So because that would have been ideal, but it just didn't work out that way, unfortunately.
Thank you.
Hey, Gary.
Hey, John.
So we kind of discussed this a while ago. How are we counting truancy?
So right now, we're taking attendance the normal way we take attendance. So whether the students are in person or working remotely, we still have to account for them attendance-wise. So we're just going to follow our truancy policies at this point. And if students hit that number of days, then we will start our policy that way. And that was the advice that we got from the state, is do what you've normally been doing when it comes to truancy. So that's what we're doing. Yeah.
So I just have a follow-up question to that. So you said you're taking attendance as normally. So if the kids I'm thinking about the high school kids that are only there 2 days a week. So they're getting, the attendance is only being taken 2 days a week, because realistically, we are not doing any remote. Is that correct?
No, I wouldn't say so.
Because when I think about remote, and I think this, I don't know if this is right or wrong, maybe I'm thinking about it wrong, but I think it's the teacher is there live,
Right.
and the student is home watching the teacher.
Right.
So is that happening anywhere? And to me, that would be where you'd take attendance. But if you're talking about high school students are only in school 2 days a week, when is attendance being taken? 5 days a week, 2 days a week? How does that truancy number reached?
Yeah. Dwayne, are you comfortable answering that? I don't mind, because I know he's doing some work at the high school with that, so. Thank you, Dr. Conway.
I think it's a really good question. At the high school, we take attendance all 4 days, each period. So students are expected to log into either through Zoom or their Google Classroom within the first 5 minutes of class, whether they're in person or remote.
Okay.
But we're not counting Wednesday.
Correct.
Right.
So what's happening on Wednesday? Nothing?
No, we had Wednesday today, and I'm trying to stand up straight from it. It was a very busy day. We have different times blocked out, but I know for a good chunk of the day, 2+ hours, teachers were teaching, they were meeting with students, there was instruction going on. We had a ton of PD today, different meetings throughout the school. The day was extremely busy all day with a lot of direct instruction.
Thank you, Dr.
I have one more, I don't know if it's the right time to ask this question or not. It's okay. First of all, I appreciate all the logistics management things that I'm hearing that have been done around COVID and around the safety, and I really appreciate everything that everyone's done. I know that people have been working really hard, and it's been a challenge. So my next question takes us to the next step about the education that's actually happening. I'm wondering, a month ago when we met, we asked for the high school to consider more time with direct teacher, whether it's remote, whether it's more in person, and I'm not sure that we've heard anything else about that. So that's one thing I'd like to hear about.
The 10 hours you're talking about.
Yes, and actually it's less than 10 hours if you consider lunch and, yeah. And the other question I have, and I don't know if you can even answer this, but I'm just wondering if there's been any discussion or if there will be in the near future any discussion about extending the days beyond 1 o'clock.
Yeah. So just so that you guys know, like what Dr. Conway just talked about, where he's actually checking in with all students every day, that was because originally it was just checking 2 days a week. So now he's actually got students at the high school level that are checking in every day with their teachers, whether they're at home or in person, and kind of getting some guidance and or assignments or checking on work with that. It's a work in progress.
I just wonder how teachers can do that when they're teaching. It just seems like it's an awful lot to ask teachers. I'm teaching a class, but I've got this other group of kids that's trying to check in with me, and I can't wrap my head around that.
Yeah.
It's like,
Yeah, and I'll just talk personally. My wife is doing that where she is, and it's not going well. I hear about it almost daily right now. I probably shouldn't be saying this live, but it is a challenge. It is. There's a lot to learn, and it's teachers having to live in two different worlds, an in-person world and a virtual world. And there's a lot to figure out when it comes to that, for sure. So I do know at the next board meeting, we're actually asking a couple of, I believe it's the English teachers. Is that right, Dr. Conway?
I think there'll be a mix across.
Oh, okay. So we're going to actually bring some teachers in to talk about what they're doing and how they're managing that.
Good,
So,
thank you, that would
yeah,
be helpful.
Yeah, and Dr. Conway started working on that right away. So, and I'm drawing a total blank. What was your second
Has there
question?
been any discussion or any plan to discuss extending the day beyond 1 o'clock in all grade levels?
Yeah. And I think we give this a couple of weeks, 4 or 5 weeks, but I think we have a board discussion at some point, probably the next board meeting, about do we want, like in my mind, this was kind of my vision, was things are going well. We expand the day, the Monday, Tuesday, Thursday, Friday, we expand that to a regular day. One of the things that we have to keep track of is how we're handling the lunches. Teachers do, contractually, there's a lot we have to pay attention to in the cleaning, but we start looking at those things after we get in, 4 or 5 weeks. If it's going well, we expand out and we have the capacity to do it. We expand out. Then if that goes well, the next step would be, in my mind, bringing back Wednesdays. So we'll watch the state markers that go along with that. And then just I check in with principals. Some principals I'm checking in with almost daily right now to see how things are going. So we just kind of keep a pulse on that. But I do think we do have to take some steps getting back to normalcy, but we have to pay attention to our capacity and what the markers are that the state is using to be able to tell us, because we're still green. So I feel like we have to start moving in that direction.
Right, John.
Yeah.
So I'm still confused on Wednesdays because it's going to use examples. I have 2 different emails in front of me on different teachers. So that means if my 2 kids' teachers have conflicting on what's supposed to happen on Wednesdays. So are all kids across, I'll just ask it in the general, are all kids across the district expected to bring their school back to work on Thursday to get credit for Wednesday or not?
So this was our first Wednesday, so one of the things we had to figure out was that expectation of how that's going to go. I'm going to be very honest, we don't have that totally ironed out, but I did ask the principals and said to them, can you make sure students are going home with something, because I don't want it perceived as this is just a day off and we're not doing anything. There should be some work of some sort going home that students can do independently from there. So what you just asked, Sean, is that's our next question is that indicative of getting credit for the day or not? And I'll be very honest, we never finished that conversation as an administrative team on how we were going to handle that, but it's like, that's the next thing we need to answer before next Wednesday.
And then my follow-up to that is so who's going to be responsible for that Wednesday work? Because that's a contradiction as well. Because it's my understanding that our district has hired a remote learning principal that will be taking over our Wednesday remote learning.
No, so that's not what the at-home supported person is doing. That's not that. It's students that are in the classroom that are going home. That's still the responsibility of the teacher that they work with on a daily basis. So yeah, we'll get that message clarified. Thank you very much for letting me know that that's out there, because we got to get that clarified.
Because I'm very concerned about the Wednesdays, because it doesn't seem to be consistent when I hear from other parents. And I've talked about that for a month now.
Yeah.
I mean, I feel it's like
You also need to look into
that's the
that
end result.
extension of the 10 hours.
Yep.
I think it was 10 hours.
Yep. No, we still have work to do. I acknowledge it. And we got to get it clarified sooner rather than later.
So the other thing that came up tonight before we even start was Sean asked about sports.
Yes, if you guys are okay, I'll go to that next if you guys are okay. I don't want to rush any of the conversation because they're great questions, and I appreciate what I'm hearing because it helps me kind of make sure things are going with the way they need to. I think I saw Betty's hand up before I go to sports.
how is social distancing going in the schools?
Yeah, so from my perspective, very well. I have heard really good things. Like anything else, if and when it needs to be addressed, it's being addressed, and then the students are complying with that. Unless I'm kind of looking at the principals, if I'm understating anything or overstating anything, I have no problem with you guys clarifying, but I know they're working really hard to make sure that we follow the distance as much as possible. So from, I think, my perspective, and unless I see the principals raise their hand, I believe it's going as well as can be expected right now.
Probably better than expected.
There we go.
The high school and the middle school are the largest group of kids. So how is that going in each of your schools?
I'll go. I think for the middle school, I want to be public, I have the best staff in the world. And they have been phenomenal. So we're always fine tuning things. Right now, I'm working on how we're going to make it even better. I think it gets better every single day. We do have a lot of kids, and people are just working so incredibly hard. But just like they're saying, when I see social distancing not happening like it should, really it's just like, hey guys, you're not spread out enough, and the kids have been phenomenal. So I think we're definitely getting much better every single day.
The movement in between classes?
My email right now. Yeah, that's why I have like 95 copies of our maps right here, because that's what our team leaders worked on for about an hour and a half today, and I met with about, I don't know, 12 staff today prior to that meeting for 2 hours, fine tune it and just make it better. Because it's like a puzzle. How do you move something right now? How do you move three teams so that they go here and they go there? And we're gonna have new announcements to improve it. The cleaning it's time consuming. We're trying to figure out new strategies to not take away how much instructional time. We're just trying to do everything.
Thank you.
Thank you, Kristen. Dr. Conway, any comments about social distancing?
Yeah, the same thing is going very well at the high school. People are doing a great job with transition. Teachers are really rocking it, and like Andrew said, students are doing great too. So far, so good.
Thank you.
Thank you, guys. Thank you, Dr. Conway, as well. So if you guys are good, I'll go on to sports. I don't want to rush anything, but I'll go on to sports. So Brant Remington, our student services director, wrote this up, but I'll go back to what Sean brought up at the beginning. I'm certainly not opposed to taking a vote. If the board would like to kind of publicly endorse it, you certainly can. So I'll just read you what Brant gave to me. And then if you guys want to discuss and or take a vote, we certainly can do that, okay? So Monday was the official start of the fall sports seasons for golf, cross country, field hockey, girls soccer, and boys soccer. Football is going to continue workout with the hopes that they can play a non-tackle 7 versus 7 game or games possibly with other local schools. And there is talk of the football season being postponed and possibly played in the springtime. The 7-on-7, they're not wearing their equipment. They're kind of basically playing kind of like flag football, I guess, or two-hand touch football. But it gives them a chance to be active outside and kind of have that team camaraderie that goes along with that. So all coaches and athletes have been instructed on the safety measures required of their sport. Each sport had some specific guidelines. The regional schedules are being worked on and plans are in the works to provide a safe playing environment for all athletes and game personnel. At this time, there will be no visiting spectators will be allowed at any Marana-Cook home events. And the exception to this would be a senior recognition that will happen at the first scheduled event for each of those sports so that we can make sure our senior athletes get recognized in their families. That is, if you haven't been through that before, that is a pretty big deal for seniors because they're recognized through the PA system and their parents, and there's pictures taken and parents come and stuff. So Brant's going to help facilitate that so we can recognize our senior families and or athletes kind of together. All the events will be videotaped and or live streamed to the best of our abilities. Brant is working on that and he's got a couple of kind of camera crews that go, I say camera crews for lack of a better way to say that, to be able to help that so that all of these sports can be live streamed and or recorded. If it can't be live streamed, it will be recorded and then posted right after so people can watch it. So Brant's put a lot of effort into that. We are talking, spectators is the big kind of question right now. So we at least want to try to take care of senior parents if at all possible. But we're leaning right now. I'm going to talk with other superintendents at tomorrow's meeting to see how they're handling spectators so that we can kind of be consistent, if at all possible, be consistent. But again, we also want to make sure that we take care of our senior athletes and senior families as much as possible. So we're trying to kind of get that figured out going forward. So that's kind of where we are. I've said all along that once the MPA gives the green light, we're going to go forward with sports, which is kind of what I did. I hope I didn't overstep on anybody's bounds here. Again, I'll kind of go back to what Sean said. If you'd like to have a formal vote, you can do that. The MPA in their document had said that school boards needed to. The guidance I got from MSBA and MSSA was that actually you didn't need to do that. You should just follow your regular procedures when it comes to extra and co-curricular sports. So that's why I was just kind of proceeding forward, but I'm not offended in any way, shape or form if you feel like it's necessary to have kind of a public vote about sports. So I'll just kind of answer questions there.
Get the bid put out for the lights?
Yes,
here?
yes, all the lights are in and Sean's writing up the bid and we'll get it
So
posted.
it is not out yet?
It's not out yet, but we've got everything we need at this point. But
No, I
Sean
understand
seems
that,
to
but
think
if
he
you
can
don't
get
the
it
bid
done.
out,
Yeah,
You can't get the lights in.
right,
You can't have sports in the middle of winter.
yeah. Well, right now the lights do work, so they're still on. The power's still on, the lights are still on, so it's just getting them replaced. Yeah. So,
You want a vote?
No, I mean, I think it's fine.
yeah.
It's up to anyone else.
Moving
I
on.
I don't think the Department of Education knows everyone's rules.
Yeah.
The commissioner, the deputy commissioner said they needed to be a vote.
Yeah, but I'm certainly okay if you guys want to do that. I do not mean to step on anyone's toes and I'm not trying to take anyone's authority away, so, but it's totally up to you guys.
I think the board agrees that we want active participation in fall sports, so I think we're in consensus with that.
All right, good. So that's my updates around schools that I wanted to get to you guys. And I am going to continue to do the Friday updates because I know other things come up as we go along. So I hope those have been helpful to you guys. And certainly if anything comes up, please don't hesitate to reach out. Sean's reached out several times. A couple other you guys have reached out several times about things to get clarification or to give me a heads up of something that was going on. So certainly continue to do that for sure. Gary? David?
Go ahead, David.
I agree. I think we're in consensus that that sounds good and would like to see things continue to progress as is needed. And I'm grateful for all the work on every stage to move forward on as much instruction as we can, as much contact as we can. And at the same time, I'm very grateful that we are proceeding following instructions, safety instructions from the state, from the Principals Association, from the CDC. And while we're continuing to work towards expanding, that we're being careful, I believe, not to be pushing it to a degree that we begin endangering our students and staff.
Yep.
Go ahead, John.
I just wanted to follow up. I mean, I appreciate, I can guess not everybody's work, but I see the work every morning. I haven't hit a cone yet or hit Mr. Boston, so my kids tease me about that, Dad, be careful. But I appreciate the work. My children have been very excited to go to school. They wish they could be in school more and longer, and they're excited to get to the learning. And, a lot of it's been procedures and stuff like that, which I fully understand, but they're excited to learn. And my son is, doesn't understand, he'd be happy to hear, Diane, that you're on top of him about the tablets, because he heard his sister is getting, she's in the 5th grade, so she's getting her laptop first. So I appreciate everybody's work. And, for my family, I just want to say thank you to everybody's hard work. I know there's been a lot of fine tuning, and at times I may sound critical, but I'm not being critical. I'm not going to hide it. I believe that kids should be in school 5 days a week, and that's the best place for them. So thank you all of you. I appreciate it.
So can I just say one more thing? We've heard the perspective of the teachers, but I just wanted to give you a perspective of 5 grandkids that I have in this district. They are all, they're following all the rules. They can't wait to tell me what all the rules are and how they're following them and how things are going so well. And I've got from 1st grade all the way to seniors, so they're in all the schools. And they're coming home really positive, which makes me feel really good. I thank you for that.
Okay,
Can I say,
go ahead.
you hear me? Do you want me to sing? No. You can't hear me? I don't have any kids in school, but I live with a 91-year-old person who hangs out with some other people in Reedfield who are grandparents. And so I run into these crews of grandparents around who are raving about how awesome things are going for their grandchildren. I'm hearing about Reedfield because I'm in Reedfield, and the middle school and the high school. So thank you guys.
Thank you, guys. They definitely needed to hear that, just so you know. So thank you guys very much for sharing that.
So we got the board committee report.
Yep. So the last thing we have on our agenda is the board committee draft lists. So we took the information you guys had shared with us, made a few tweaks to things. You can see what's there. Gary and I sat, I think it was on Tuesday, and went through one more time just to make sure we had everything covered. So if there's any questions, you can reach out to me or to Dr. Carr, and we'll certainly help you out with that. Most of you guys kind of stayed where you were, and I really appreciate that because that builds a lot of continuity in what's going on there. So I really appreciate that for sure, because it does take a lot of time. So our next step is we will start reaching out and we will start setting committee meeting dates and regular agendas, and we will get that started. Barring any need for changes, we'll get that started probably tomorrow or Friday. So we'll reach out to committee members and see what your availability is, and we'll start going. So I don't know if there's any questions that myself or Dr. Carr can field around committee work. If there's anything at all, we certainly can do that. And again, I just really appreciate people kind of following the continuity, because it makes us a better functioning board moving forward. So I really appreciate that for sure. So I will turn it now back over to Dr. Carr.
Second.
All in favor? Adjourned.